Welcome to the summer exhibit here at the Chik-Wauk Museum and Nature Center. This 10-minute presentation will give some of the background info to the life of Tommy Banks and his connection to the Gunflint Trail, including his friendship with Billy Needham. Tommy Banks was involved in bootlegging during Prohibition and eventually became head of the Syndicate, or Irish mob that dominated the organized crime scene in Minneapolis during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Like his infamous contemporary, Al Capone, the crime that put Tommy Banks in prison in 1953 was income tax evasion. My name is John Hutchinson, and I was 5 years old in 2005 when my grandparents purchased a cabin on the shores of Hungry Jack Lake. When I learned that the cabin was originally built in the early 1930s by a real-life gangster with accommodations for his bodyguards, it made my summer adventures at the cabin even more exciting. This article from the St. Paul Dispatch, dated July 1st, 1959, gives a great introduction to the life of Tommy Banks. Thomas W. Banks was born on August 4th, 1894, in Hershey, Nebraska. He was the third of 6 children. Tommy's mother died in 1905 when he was 11 years old. His father ran a dry goods and clothing store. Tommy ended his formal education at age 13 when he ran away from home after an incident at his father's store. Tommy found his way to Omaha, then on to Chicago, and then to New York, where he worked at various hotels as a bellhop and pageboy. In New York, he met a man called Prince Rupert, who worked for 4 different French wine companies. Prince Rupert took a liking to Tommy, and Tommy was soon in his employ at $100 a month plus expenses. Tommy began a working around-the-clock career, both legal and otherwise, that did not slack up until well after the bootlegging days of Prohibition. We know that Tommy married Miss Reta Lee, a milliner, in 1915, and that he served in the military briefly in 1918 during World War I. Tommy and Reta came to Minneapolis in January of 1919 when he was 25, where he quickly became the head bellboy at the Dyckman Hotel. But his principal occupation was selling whiskey at a profit of $100 to $200 a day. After 6 months, he left the Dyckman and started hauling whiskey from Canada to Minneapolis. Hauling the contraband liquor across the border by automobile earned him between $1,000 and $1,500 a trip, and he made at least 1 trip a week. He continued this enterprise from 1920 until 1924, the first 4 years of the Prohibition era. Tommy gave up the Canadian enterprise in 1924 and then began making regular alcohol runs from Chicago to Minneapolis, making up to 3 trips a week through 1929 at $400 to $500 per trip. He testified in court during his tax trial that he piled up huge profits and eluded revenue agents. He said he kept no records of his financial operations and had his profits taken in cash. He testifies that he usually gave his wife a gift of $5,000 every Christmas during the Prohibition years, and she used that money for real estate investments. Banks also testified in court that during those years, he and his wife kept upwards of $300,000 in cash in their Minneapolis home, hidden in a trunk and later in a floor vault. That would be the equivalent today of over $4 million of cash hidden in your home. Interestingly, my grandfather found a hidden compartment under the floor of the cabin during that first summer of 2005 while working to repair rotted floor joists. Unfortunately, no hidden stash of cash was left behind. Tommy was indicted twice during the 1920s, and because of his convictions was unable to obtain a liquor license. But his wife, Reta, conveniently acted as a front for many of Tommy's real estate holdings, including Hungry Jack Lodge and the Blue Goose Resort on Mille Lacs, along with many nightclubs and restaurants in Minneapolis, as well as farm properties. In 1950, the IRS came after Tommy Banks for back taxes for the years 1945 to 1947. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and the prosecutor was Miles Lord, Assistant District Attorney. Tommy Banks was sentenced to 3 years at Leavenworth Prison. He seemed to make good use of his time in prison and earned a library management certificate. The IRS brought a civil suit against Tommy Banks in 1959 for unpaid taxes plus interest. The hefty bill, including unpaid taxes, fraud penalties, and interest, came to $590,000. We know that Tommy was an avid hunter and fisherman and enjoyed his time at his cabin on Hungry Jack Lake. It was there that he met and became friends with Billy Needham. Billy had a cabin with frontage on both Hungry Jack Lake and Bearskin Lake, and was a cabin caretaker and fishing guide for Tommy. Billy was well known for his hand-painted maps of the Gunflint Trail area lakes and for his diamond willow furniture and folk art. Some of the pieces Billy made for Tommy Banks are on display here at the museum this summer. A post on the Boundary Country blog by Ted Young relates a fishing tale involving Tommy and Billy. One of the stories I know about Tommy Banks was told to me by Billy Needham before his death. Billy lived on Hungry Jack Lake for many years and took care of Tommy's cabin and was his fishing guide. According to Billy, on his first fishing trip out with Tommy and several of his bodyguards, they were fishing out of a large canoe on Rose Lake when someone in the party hooked a very large northern. After a long battle with the fish, it was finally brought up to the canoe. However, Billy, upon seeing the fish, realized it was too large to bring into the already crowded canoe, and he started to pull out his hunting knife to cut the fish loose. With that, Tommy's bodyguards all drew their guns and dispatched the fish in a blaze of bullets. This is the only picture of Tommy's wife Reta that we have, and it shows her enjoying some time fishing, taken in August of 1967. Another story about Tommy Banks was told by Carol Fertig, whose family, the Finks, have long had a cabin on Hungry Jack Lake. Carol wrote, "When I was a young child, we were taught to stay away from Tommy's cabin because he was involved in organized crime in Minneapolis. In spite of that, when I was around 9 years old, I angrily marched, with Rich, his friend, to Tommy Banks' cabin. We interrupted his dinner, and I gave him a piece of my mind. This was without the knowledge of my parents. Tommy's bodyguard had shot and killed our favorite bear, Louie. Every day, Louie made the rounds of the cabins, and one would hear, 'Louie's coming! Louie's coming!' as he went along the shore. The day after our dinner encounter with Tommy, Dad loaded us kids into the car to make our regular trek to the garbage dump. On our way out, we met up with Tommy and his bodyguard. Both cars braked. Tommy was out of his pickup in a flash and tried to open the driver's door on our car with the intention of dragging my dad out. 'How dare you send your kids to do your dirty work?' he shouted at my dad. My brother Rich started crying, which triggered the rest of us. Strange, but I don't remember getting into trouble for disobeying my parents. I'm sure they never imagined that kids would do such a thing." Although Tommy and Reta were married until her death in 1971, they never had children, and it appears that there was another woman in Tommy's life. This is a photo of Thelma Anderson, taken at Tommy's cabin in 1951. In 1934, Thelma, age 21, was given a job in Brady's Bar in Minneapolis by Tommy Banks. This began a relationship that lasted 50 years, until his death in 1984. These photos show Thelma at Tommy's cabin and were taken in 1971. The bunk bed ladder and the dining room set were made of diamond willow by Billy Needham. The last picture we have of Tommy shows him standing with Thelma in 1978, when Tommy was 84 years old. He passed away in Minneapolis 7 years later, at the age of 91, from congestive heart failure. And that will end the story for today, but we must mention the Halverson family, who lived in the cabin next door to Tommy on Hungry Jack Lake for many years. They have generously shared all the newspaper clippings, photos, and memorabilia that they have collected to make this summer exhibit possible.